Thank you for joining us again this week for our Thursday Thoughts. If you weren't able to watch our first video, Jerry did a great job of introducing our first series of God Is, and he talked about how God is love. So this week I'm going to continue with that series talking about God is faithful. I'm spending a lot of time reading this book. I have a different sort of collection in my library, at my office, and at home. Usually at my office I have my spiritual books, my religious books for growing and for encouragement, and just all my religious books. But at home I'm pretty stocked with what I call my secular books, and it's basically just history books about mostly George Washington, but the Revolutionary War and all that kind of stuff, because that's what I'm interested in. I've been spending a lot of time reading this book by Brad Meltzer, The First Conspiracy, and it's about this plot to kill George Washington at the beginning of the Revolutionary War. Because if Washington falls, then basically the whole patriot cause falls and the British win. And what's so interesting about these books is that you're introduced to people and characters that you've maybe never heard of that have changed the course of history forever just by their actions. And so one man that I was introduced to in this book, and maybe you've heard of him, is Dr. Benjamin Church. I don't know if you've heard of that name, Dr. Benjamin Church. He's basically a world-renowned person in the Revolutionary War by his actions. And who he was this very acclaimed person, Harvard educated physician and strong patriot. He became John Adams' personal doctor, and then appointed through that by the Continental Congress, a very long name that is hard to memorize, Chief Physical and Director General of the Army's Medical Service, which is basically just making him the first American Surgeon General of the U.S. Army and of the United States. But spoiler alert, if you know anything about history, Dr. Benjamin Church was found, tried, and convicted all of sending secret messages and secret letters to the British about what the Patriots were doing at the time. And so he was forced into imprisonment and had to run away and do all this crazy stuff. But through that and through the Revolutionary War, the idea of loyalty and faithfulness to the cause was always questioned after that. And we know a lot of guys named, for instance, Benedict Arnold would fall into that category of having their faithfulness to the American cause questioned and them falling short of that. And so through the story of time of the Revolutionary War, people's faithfulness was always questioned. And for us as readers of these kinds of books, people's faithfulness to the cause is always questioned. But what's amazing about being Christians is through the story of our life and through the narrative of the Bible from Genesis, from the beginning to the Revelation, is God's faithfulness is never questioned. We never have to question God's faithfulness to us and to His will of saving His people. If you look in Psalm 94, go ahead and turn to Psalm 94 really quick, but you can see in the story of time through Scripture, starting in Genesis, God's faithfulness with Abraham. Even though He told him to take his family and go, God was always faithful and was always there for Abraham and his family. And then it goes into Exodus, and you see Moses and Joshua and them leading the children of Israel through the wilderness on their way to Canaan, and you see God's faithfulness and guidance for them with these pillars of clouds and pillar of fire by night, and then God, through His guidance and provision of His people, He sends judges and He sends kings and He sends prophets to guide over His people because God is faithful. If you're in Psalm 94, I'm going to start reading, starting in verse 12. Blessed is the man whom you discipline, O Lord, and whom you teach out of your law, to give him rest from days of trouble until the pit is dug for the wicked, for the Lord will not forsake his people. He will not abandon his heritage. For justice will return to the righteous, and all the upright in heart will follow it. The NLT does a beautiful description of verse 14. It says, talking about verse 14, he will not abandon his special possession. I think that's amazing because as God's people, we are his special possession that he is faithful to, and he will not abandon us. And I think that's so important to remember in times like today, times like now, where everything is uncertain. Talking about things uncertain, you look in 1 Peter when Peter tries to write this letter to this number of churches, these multiple churches, and explain to them, look, God is faithful to you and to your cause, and he's faithful to his promises to protect his people. And if you are a Christian, if you've chosen to become that people, then he has promised to help you and to be with you. So I'm going to read 1 Peter starting in verse chapter 2, starting in verse 4. As you come to him, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God chosen and precious. You yourselves, like living stones, are built up as a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in Scripture, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. For the honor is for you who believe, but for those who do not believe, the stone of the builders is rejected, and has become the cornerstone, and the stone of stumbling, and a rock of offense. They stumble because they disobey the word as they were destined to. And here's where we really want to focus on. In verse 8 or verse 9, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into this marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. You had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. I understand that Peter here is talking to a specific group of people, but I think if you add two and two together, people that have chosen to become God's people, that have made those sacrifices of their life to him, those are his chosen people. And just as he was writing to people that were uncertain about their future because of this persecution from the Roman government, from Roman officials, facing persecution, he had to remind them that God is faithful. And just in this time of uncertainty for us, through whatever has come our way, through the tornadoes that we've had to deal with, through this virus that we've had to deal with sickness, through technology that we've had to deal with, through uncertain times, God remains faithful. Just as I talked about in my sermon a couple weeks ago, he's faithful to his promises to be with his people. He sticks to his will to want to save his people. And he sticks to his promise of love for everybody and his love for you. God is faithful. Thank you for joining us this week, this Thursday. And I hope you'll join us again next week as Jared continues this series of God Is. Have a wonderful Thursday.